right. So hello, welcome everyone. Nice to see all of you with us today. My name is Karen Brown. I lead Zoomin's enablement and value team, and I will be your host for today's webinar. We are here today to talk about one of the most critical, fascinating, important topics in this landscape of AI, which is how to consolidate and secure knowledge for your AI applications. And we have two amazing speakers with us today, Hannan Saltzman and Ryan Susman. Hannan and Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. Today's presentations will be delivered to you on this webinar with the ability to ask questions in the chat box, and we will answer them as they come in. We will also, at the end, have some time for Q&A, so we're looking forward to getting all of your questions. We already had some people sending us a few questions in advance, but we really encourage you to have a dynamic conversations with us. We have a packed agenda for you today, and the topics that we are going to cover are the synergy of knowledge and AI. I think today, documentation team, tech writers, developers, AI specialists, like no time before, are going to start working together. And the close synergy between content, between knowledge and AI is a critical infrastructure for all of you to dive into and understand the implications of. We'll talk about the challenges and the approach and different approaches to how to actually bring content in a secure way into your applications. And we will hear some of the key best practices, lessons learned from our expert, Ryan Susman, who's going to share from his very robust experience in this field. And as I mentioned, at the end, we will have a Q&A session. So thank you so much for taking the time. I hope you'll find this relevant, meaningful, useful. And Hannan, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you very much, Karen. So sometimes, at least for me, it's kind of hard to grasp how it's only been, I think, less than a year. I think it was November 2022 when OpenAI introduced ChatGPT to the world. I mean, if I were asking enterprise companies, what is your enterprise AI strategy? Even 6 months ago, people would be like, what? We're not sure we have something. But right now, everybody is already on their way because I think we all adopted, AI as practitioners, both as individuals and as professionals. And actually, earlier this year, Zoomin has initiated basically a survey that what prompted us to do it is we wanted to check two things, right? One is we wanted to check with enterprise companies, where are they in the adoption curve of conversational AI for customer service? And what we found out was actually pretty interesting. I mean, one conclusion that we had is that everybody's doing something about it, right? Everybody is either learning or starting to experiment. So that was, the first, conclusion that we had. The second thing was that almost nobody was using this technology in production, in mass scale, and kind of considered that and fully implemented thing. I mean, we had, I think, 37% of the companies we interviewed were already starting to roll out things like practical actions to prepare for a piloting it now, started rolling it out on a limited scale. But for me, it was like an innovator's dream. I mean, on the one hand, all of us as professionals, it's early enough in the market that we can introduce very exciting, AI-based applications within our companies and be the first to be doing these things. But on the other hand, very in contrast to, how things were a year or two ago, the technology is there, it's ready, it's affordable than ever, it's maturing every week, every day we're hearing about new opportunities to use it better. But this is probably the ideal time to be able to build AI-based applications. The other thing that we wanted to check in this survey was to see how people, especially in the technical communications and knowledge industry, how they predict that generative AI would result in impacting their industry. And what we've seen is, a very clear 59% of their people interviewed thought that generative AI would have a major disruption to their, to the industry as a whole and to their job specifically. So I think today's on the webinar, we have a mixed audience. Some of these people here are content practitioners, some of them are IT people, some of them are developers. But I think what's very clear and joined to all of us is that our companies and our customers, which are individuals and professionals in their own rights, and they have similar expectations, this is what they expect from us, to be leading with AI and implementing that into their day-to-day workflows. So when we think about how AI can change the knowledge industry, I think the first thing we need to think about is what's the knowledge lifecycle. And regardless of which company you look at, the knowledge lifecycle is almost always identical. I mean, there is knowledge authoring, where content is being authored in different tools by different people. Then this content is being managed, translated, versioned, and reviewed, both for accuracy and for like semantical or stylistic review. Then it's being published to somewhere where knowledge consumers, whether it's employees, partners, or customers, can consume that content. And then we're busy in essentially analyzing the interactions of how people respond to that content, both to find holes in that content and understand how we can improve it, right? So that's pretty straightforward. And there is a lot to be said in how generative AI impacts this knowledge lifecycle in each one of these stages: the authoring, the management, the publishing, and the analysis. So this is not the webinar in order to go deep there, but just to recap that Zoomin has published earlier this year an extensive white paper about how generative AI impacts the technical content industry, which does that just that. It gives you the high-level predictions. Where do we think AI is going to touch each one of these phases in the knowledge lifecycle? And we highly recommend, if you guys haven't read it yet, you can scan this barcode here to get access, or we will also circulate that in the follow-up email to this webinar. So let's look about how does the typical knowledge landscape looks like in your typical enterprise, right? So the way it works is that companies start building products, and when they build product, they basically start creating technical documentation. This technical documentation is created as how-to guides or user manuals and all kinds of different tools, typically used by technical writers or engineers. Then you have API documentation that's being generated by R&D. And then when the product is starting to be mature and goes to the market, you see more and more repositories of knowledge being built. Some of them are courses with learning and training, in-product copies that are meant to be exposed as in-product help inside of your product. Customers are starting to use it, right? So they start to open support tickets. Your support reps are writing knowledge articles, which are sort of meant to solve or to document how to solve a case. And then you have peer-to-peer discussions with forums and communities. And historically, the reason customers came to us as a company was to basically get all of this complexity on the left aggregated and abstracted. So what they really want to do is they wanted to either build enterprise applications that allow their customers to consume this knowledge in documentation sites, knowledge-based sites, embedded assistants in their product, in their support site or CRMs. And that could have been used either by us providing these applications or them building them themselves. But a trend that we started seeing in the last 6 to 9 months, following the emergence of generative AI, is that first of all, more and more companies are building applications that go beyond the traditional, hey, I need a knowledge-based site or I need a support site, anything from chatbots to more specialized applications. And the second trend is that basically every enterprise application is now expected to become an AI application. All right, I'm going to repeat that. Any enterprise application today is either already or will become an AI application, just because every CIO, every customer is now expecting to have like AI-based Copilot functionality embedded in their day-to-day workflows wherever they are, into your support site, in your knowledge base, in your product, whatever it is. So the expectation is definitely there. And what we're seeing is when we look at where customers are investing in terms of their AI investments and what they're building, then we found this great research by Forbes that kind of analyzes the market and shows where companies are investing their AI spend, right? Or in other words, what are they building? So what you can see very clearly is that the number one priority for enterprise AI investing today is building AI applications that are meant to empower customer service and customer experience. And the way companies are looking at that is the first thing, they're saying is, okay, we want to build these, customer service boosters or customer experience boosters in the AI age. But a question that I get asked a lot is, what do I need to be AI ready? Okay, as a company. And the answer is actually pretty simple. You need three things to be AI ready. The first thing you need is you need to be able to get all your content, all this potentially case deflecting or case solving content. You need to have it centralized in one place, in one schema, so that you can easily apply whatever logic you want on it or whatever AI tools. The second thing you need is to be able to enforce content governance and security. Okay, a lot of this content is sensitive, and you really need to know what are you doing with it, who is it being shown to, and make sure that you're not breaking any of your company's compliance codes. And the third thing you need is an AI technology, okay? Also called a GPT or large language model technology, which you can get either from a vendor like Zoomin, or you can just build your own or use, the many vendors out there. So when we basically try to think about, what are we seeing out there in the market and how companies are thinking about it, we're seeing two major types of companies, okay? The first type would be enterprise companies that are looking to buy a turnkey solution. So when I say they're looking to buy a turnkey, what do I mean? I mean, they're looking for essentially think about it as AI in a box or AI-based customer service functionality. And what's kind of common with these companies is the way they're thinking about it is, I need specific AI capabilities, typically for my customer support. I don't have very specific needs, right? I do support pretty much like the other guy. And I don't have any complex integrations or any other requirement. I want to simplify things, and therefore I want to basically use a commodity in order to fulfill that. And the other type of companies we're seeing is companies that are looking to build AI applications in-house. In this case, they're looking to build their own AI stack and AI application internally with their own teams. And when you would see that is typically when the requirements include either very custom flows. They want all kinds of sophisticated, whether it's chatbots or AI-based wizards that would be deeply integrated into their custom data model, into their applications and products. They want it to look in a very, very specific way. Or in some verticals, they just don't feel comfortable to be delegating, and sharing their data with a third party in that case, and they want to own everything and control everything. So while Zoomin does offer some solutions for the left side as well, today's webinar is mostly addressing the right use case, and we're going to be talking about the challenges of those what we call builders or building in-house companies. So building knowledge-infused AI applications, in theory, it should be pretty straightforward, right? I mean, we've seen these kind of companies dozens of times, and it almost always looks identical. So you have a chief technology officer, or you have a head of service with an innovation team, and they're getting a group of developers together. And the first thing this group of developers are trying to do is find out, which knowledge do I need to take, whether it's structured or unstructured. And the theory is pretty simple. We take the knowledge, we put it in a vector store or vector database where it's being indexed. We're choosing an LLM, whether it's OpenAI, Cohere, or another vendor, and we're using some kind of an open framework in order to build an AI application on top of it. Okay, and then from there, you can ask questions, you can get answers, or you can do any other GenAI capabilities based on that model. So again, very straightforward on the surface, but what we see is when companies are really trying to do that, the problem starts by this very simple thing about how do I get the knowledge. So the knowledge is, first of all, fragmented. It's in different repositories, built in different formats, different schemas. And this is a big challenge, not just to know where it is, but also to be able to develop and maintain these point-to-point integrations to each one of these sources. I mean, it might be 2, 3, 5, or 10 different sources and integrations, which you need to build, you need to productize over time, and you need to standardize across formats and schemas. If that's not simple enough, then essentially in all kinds of systems, like, for example, your Confluence or your SharePoint or your Google, there might be some sensitive data. in the form of PII or PCI or other, personally, potentially damaging information, that you want to make sure that you mask it properly or you scrub it. And then even if you took the content, harmonized it, and were able to somewhat scrub it, you still have a huge challenge in the form of enforcing access control, right? So the last thing you want to do is to build a chatbot, for example, where a user would ask a question and would get an answer based on content they're not even allowed to see. So what we're finding, companies do is essentially battle these challenges of building custom integrations, custom security code with people and developers which are not experts on these things. Now, think about one of the things is this is just one AI application that's being built in your company, right? I mean, typically there would be many applications like this, and what would happen is each one of these development teams is going to get direct access to these repositories of knowledge. Each of them is going to be building their own integrations, their own scrubbing code, their own access control logic. So the more of these teams, the risk, and it just gets worse with the risk being heightened, because with every new AI application being built, you're getting into a situation where you're just losing control. So there is no central and reusable governance infrastructure for future AI development. The second thing is, giving developers that are not security experts to be, scrubbing content and applying access control leads to a risk of exposing sensitive information. And the third thing is just a lot of inefficiency and a lot of cost. I mean, you find yourself getting your best developers spending hundreds of hours on basically undifferentiated heavy lifting by building tedious content integrations and security pipelines that, honestly, it's not their day-to-day business and they're not experts on this. So when we think about, what is the right approach or how we should be looking at it, I mean, if we think about it, you have in your company, you have these knowledge repositories on the left that you want to bring in, right? So where the industry is going is the usage of knowledge governance platforms for AI. So knowledge governance platforms have been there for a while, but now with AI, they're becoming much more important. So what you have is a platform which essentially fulfills three major tasks. First is a consolidation, or in very simple words, bring all that knowledge into one place in one schema. The second one is applies the trust layer, which makes sure that nobody sees things they're not supposed to be seeing. And the third layer is the MLOps layer that allows you to easily operationalize that into your AI stack. So let's go deeper and basically talk about the consolidation. The consolidation means take whether it's Confluence, Google, SharePoint, whatever it is, bring everything into a single content lake and transform everything into a single schema, which is also unified. Make sure that all the personal and the sensitive information is being scrubbed out of the content, and making sure that you have efficient access control mechanisms to protect it, and make sure to serve it only to those who are authorized to do it. And then help you index that within a vector database, whether it's hosted or your own database, provide you with the ability to A/B test embeddings and models on it, allow you to do some kind of a query to test out what are the results, and provide you with an API that will allow you to abstract, the access. So the result is basically developers focused on using, open frameworks like LangChain, for example, to be building these AI applications, choosing their LLM of choice, but instead of going and hunting for integration with each one of these sources and applying all that custom security layers themselves, they have an abstraction layer in the form of the AI knowledge governance platforms, which does these, three things for them. It unifies all the content for them, it secures all the content for them, and it takes care a lot of the MLOps works by also delegating the vector store management into an abstraction API. So you probably ask yourself, okay, I understand, this concept of an AI knowledge governance platform, but where does that sit within my AI application stack in my company? All right, and the answer is pretty simple. You have, think about the architecture. The architecture is you have your enterprise data here, or your enterprise knowledge. It can sit in a GitHub, it can sit in a CCMS, it can sit on all kinds of enterprise applications like Salesforce or ServiceNow or Zendesk or whatever it is, or it can just be in websites or a database. Then you have the knowledge governance layer, which takes care of consolidating all that knowledge into one place, securing it properly, and essentially indexes it with the right embeddings in a vector database, which can be hosted or yours. Then you're using, libraries or frameworks like LangChain, like Hugging Face, and like others to be building your apps. And then the result is actually your applications, which your partners, your customers, and your employees are using. All right. So this is kind of the theory. And now I want to introduce with great pleasure Ryan Susman. So Ryan is an SME for AI/ML, and he has a tremendous amount of experience in content center technologies for some of the largest financial services companies in the US. So thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you very much. And I need to share my screen here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thanks for inviting me to co-host this webinar. I'll tell you what, working with Hannan is very exciting. He's got a lot of energy, and I really like the direction that we're moving in. A lot of this AI/ML space is so new and so exciting and moving so quickly. There's a lot of experimentation going on. And so today you're going to hear kind of my perspective of what the last 11 months have been in terms of both experimentation and production implementations. And so first and foremost, I break the different categories of AI/ML, especially generative AI, into two production type implementations: productivity optimization and mission critical augmentation. So we've seen the likes, we've seen internal chatbots to surface information to employees or associates, where we can just ask simple questions and we get the answers, and that helps us in our day-to-day. And these are generally low-risk implementations, right? It's okay if the bot makes a mistake here and there, right? These things get vet out before the product is complete. Whereas in your mission-critical augmentation solutions, these are purpose-built applications. They're very tactical in nature, and you really do need to account on their accuracy, right? And so already you're starting at a medium-tier implementation and moving up to that high-risk category. So if you think about a chatbot that's internal-facing for an associate, you might think of information surfacing as, I would need to search for the holidays this year for my company. It's okay, right, if it makes a mistake in how it's presented in that information. But if you're thinking about a chatbot that lives on your website and it's client-facing and it's surfacing terms and conditions, you need to make sure that that bot is accurate 100% of the time. And so let's align and look at some terminology. I recognize the audience here is very diverse. We have content authors and those with experience in IT. So we're going to start at the fundamentals, and we're going to look at some terminology. So retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, you're going to start to hear this a lot. If you're a content author and if you haven't been exposed to this term, get ready, it's coming. So everything that has been written that we maintain internally as our knowledge and content repositories are now worth their weight in gold with this generative AI technology. And so think about how, and maybe you've already experienced this, where your information has been requested to be fed into some type of LLM technology to be scrambled and mixed into a new message, maybe a chatbot, maybe a search bar, maybe to resolve tickets or inquiries. And so RAG is probably the most exciting use case, because this is something that just hasn't been possible before. There's a whole lot of other opportunity available. RAG is certainly the most exciting. To dig a little bit deeper, we're going to talk about two other terms, one being vectorization. And so this is kind of a high-level introduction into vectorization. And this is the magic behind the technology, where you can actually convert your written text into numerical vectors. Now, there's a lot of science that goes into this. However, the most important thing when it comes to understanding the encoding and decoding of LLM technology is, how does the LLM recognize the written text, and more importantly, the semantics of the written text. And so first we vectorize our text, and then we embed that. And that's the relationship between vectors and how that document went from high dimensional space to low dimensional space. So as a content author, you may not need to be too terribly concerned with these two. However, if you're someone who's practicing AI/ML technology, these are fundamental to your success, right? And then finally, relevance. This is certainly something that you're going to want to think about later in your AI/ML journey, where you're drawing more relevant conclusions based on usage, and that's maybe rebalancing and surfacing different embeddings among each other, so that way you can surface the best results. All right, so one of the best analogies that I have for this technology, and the reason I share it with you today, is because I think a lot of people can benefit from hearing this. Large language models, as they stand today, are just language calculators. So on screen, we have a very primitive example. A dog plus leash plus outside the prompt is, what comes next? Well, we're going on a dog walk, right? So if we take this baseline example and we transform this into a production use case, maybe we have the request to reset my password, right? We bring in our documentation on how to perform password resets. Our prompt to the LLM is, please help this customer. And the output of that model is instructions to perform password reset. So now you can kind of see how this concept of a language calculator can be used at scale, both internally and externally. And there's a lot of challenges that come with that. And we're going to talk about a couple of them here really quickly. And that is, when it comes to our content, it is everywhere. I have seen a very organized, very structured approach where people bring in a very tactical small set and they build their chatbot or their search bar, their whatever the AI/ML solution is going to be. You know, they have their focus and they know exactly what data set they want to use. They also know exactly how that data set is written, right? And so to bring in a single silo of information with low ambiguity, very well structured, you're going to see a lot of success in that AI. However, what we're also seeing is just this mass ingestion of Confluence and SharePoint, just everything that's out there written by every walk of life, loading it all to a vector store. And I think you can imagine some of the complexities that come from that, right? And so that's where we talk about inconsistencies. And so I've seen implementations, like let's take Confluence, for example, where we've just ingested everything in Confluence. And then we kind of expected it to work. And then we're surprised to go, oh, wait a minute. When I ask this question, it's very confused. Now, when I look at the results from the vector store, yeah, I guess that makes sense. That question I asked did return those 20 documents that kind of all relate to each other. And therefore, the AI struggled to generate an answer. And so a principle that still holds true to this day is garbage in, garbage out. Not that any of this content is garbage. However, if it's very ambiguous and it's not structured well to be ingested by AI, not well taxonomized, you're going to find that these consistencies may degrade the performance of your AI. And then finally, not optimized for retrieval. This can be easily solved in most cases with appropriate taxonomy and governance. However, it also comes down to how the knowledge and content can be written, right? So one of my favorite examples that really drives this home is if I'm calling into a financial institution and let's say I explain to the representative, hey, my dog ate my debit card. Well, I don't have any type of knowledge article or content that explicitly outlines the resolution to the canine species digesting a piece of plastic, right? And semantically, that might be a way to describe it. However, I may have knowledge and content articles on how to replace a debit card. So how do I draw those conclusions together? And you can do that syntactically. You can do that with taxonomy. But semantically, this is where we want to find ways to optimize our information retrieval. One of the most important assets that I think anyone has in this space is the ability to build a search bar first, or at least search functionality, retrieval functionality, not necessarily like a UI, like a search bar, but build sufficient search functionality that you can measure and quantify. And then from there, enable your AI application with that, because your AI is only going to be as good as its ability to retrieve information. And so these three right here, if you don't have a strategic plan for each one of them, your AI will only be as good as the information you provide to it. So be thinking about your taxonomy, be thinking about your access control, be thinking about how your content is written. I've seen some really interesting use cases where simply a knowledge article is written to guide someone through a password reset, but that knowledge article was written for an employee to read, not necessarily a customer. While it doesn't contain any sensitive information, and we can totally show the customer this article, it wasn't written for their digestion. And so when an AI interpreted it, it had to kind of go and refactor that. And sometimes things get a little wonky, right? And so as you're authoring your content and authoring your knowledge, be thinking about who the next big interpreter of your content and knowledge is going to be, right? Is it going to be a human, or is it going to be an AI that digests what you've written and attempts to refactor it? So if at the end of the day, you feel very, very confident in your retrieval ability, then I think you're going to be successful with, certainly in RAG use cases, generative AI in your applications. And it's serving different audiences with very different needs. I really should draw attention to this. I have seen this technology built once and then deployed at many different capacities. Maybe it's deployed in a chatbot, maybe it's deployed in a search bar, maybe it's deployed in some type of automated batch job that operates behind the scenes. Be thinking about who's engaging your technology. Is it a B2B use case? Is it a B2C use case, right? Is this the cashier that is, they're earning an hourly wage, right? Or is this the business owner, right? They're all going to engage your technology differently. And so their utterance, their need, it may be buried under several layers of understanding. And so just be thinking about, just because you built it once, it may not scale everywhere well, right? So again, it comes down to the fundamentals. What knowledge base is most appropriate to surface in what channel in what implementation? All right, so I have 6 lessons learned from a handful of recent implementations that I love to share with people as they start their AI/ML journey and or those that may be continuing their AI/ML journey. So first, experimentation, right? You will be successful if you thoroughly understand how effective your technology is and how effective your solution is. And so if you just load everything up into a vector store and deploy the bot and assume that it's going to work, think about your evaluation metrics. Think about the most effective way that you can measure this technology. Personally, one of my favorite evaluation metrics in the information surfacing space, and this is still very debated, is mean average precision. What's the likelihood that in the top X results, I am going to surface relevant information to that query, right? And so if I can wrap my information surfacing and my retrieval abilities with an evaluation metric like mean average precision, and I can work with my knowledge authors and content authors to establish a golden truth baseline, I can actually test the AI every night to ensure that it continues to feed relevant information to the customers. And that's what experimentation got me. We experimented with it. We understood a good evaluation metric that we can use, and then we use that as a post-production evaluation metric, right? The next is performance. If you're just sitting there waiting for your chatbot to load or waiting for your search bar to load, I'm not a UI expert, but I might assume that it's not working. And so be thinking about, especially with large data sets, if you really do need to chunk your data sets into multiple sub searches, right? Be thinking about from a UI perspective, how you can most effectively surface that information to be digested effectively. I have partnered with several experts in the UI UX space, and they've taught me a lot. This implementation of AI is not, it's not just a data scientist who's in the driver's seat building and deploying this technology. You still need all the other walks of life to understand what the AI is capable of doing and then surfacing that effectively. Internally, you do want to be working very hard on making sure that you are providing the best service that you can. Retrieval accuracy. So I've already spoken about this enough, and it really drives the point home on the importance. If you're going to build a chatbot, and let's say it only has 10 documents exposed to it, right? 10 distinctly unique documents, easily distinguishable from each other. Retrieval accuracy should be close to 100%, if not 100%, right? And so those circumstances, you really want to focus on the use cases and diversity of the implementation. Bring in crowdsource, right? Crowdsource, grab production data, grab non-production data, and try to test your solution as much as possible, because what you want to do is, especially if it's a lightweight use case, is you want to release that and just kind of be in monitoring mode. You don't want to have your hands on it all the time, right? Or you're losing all the benefit of building the technology. So retrieval accuracy, if you focus on the accuracy up front, you'll be successful on the back. Target implementation, I spoke about it a little bit earlier. So one of the most valuable lessons I learned in my journey, I built a retrieval technology that surfaces, it has access to a large data set. And when I built it originally as a search bar, they said, hey, this will work great in a chatbot, and this will work great over here. I said, it might. However, people engage chatbots differently. They engage search bars differently. And so we took that data and we tested it. We said, okay, we're going to have to go through some training here to ensure that this one model is effectively surfacing information on both channels. And so that was definitely probably one of my most valuable lessons learned in terms of information retrieval. Is the target implementation drives how you're going to craft it behind the scenes. Here we think about taxonomy. Taxonomy, right? When I started my journey, just like any other developer, I'm a developer at heart. When I started my journey, I had no idea what a good taxonomy would look like. And I partnered with knowledge champions and content authors, and they taught me what a good taxonomy is. They taught me the importance of tagging documentation, the importance of the appropriate creation, management, and deprecation of knowledge. And once I fully understood their taxonomy, I did not build their taxonomy for them. I let the experts build a taxonomy. And then I did everything I could to understand it. Now that I understood it, I was able to turn around to product teams where we implemented this technology and says, this is how the information is organized. If we want to ensure that we're surfacing the right information to the right people at the right time, we may want to consider following the taxonomy that the experts have authored. 10 out of 10, I would do it again, right? This was one of the biggest challenge, and it significantly reduced ambiguity in the technologies that we built. And if you don't know, ambiguity murders this technology, right? And so a good, effective taxonomy is absolutely fundamental. It's one of the first questions I ask whenever I'm engaging a new team with their knowledge base. I said, tell me about your taxonomy. And if they don't have one, that's totally fine. I like to share my experience, say, hey, let me introduce you to a few people who have a very effective taxonomy. I would consider adopting it. I've seen it work very, very well. Data sensitivity. So most organizations decorate their knowledge and content very well, right? Classified, sensitive, those sorts of things. Be very cognizant of that, right? It's far too easy to just say, oh, just give me everything. I'll put it into a vector store. It's far too easy to just put it in a vector, and Hannan touched on it earlier, put it in a vector store, and now that chatbot has access to all of it, right? And now there's a lot of different ways, Hannan spoke about, scrubbing that out, and I mentioned taxonomy previously. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. And so be cognizant of what data you now have available, because it's far too exciting to just ingest millions of documents and say, I now have this super smart chatbot that surfaces information well, because it is totally possible. You don't know. You didn't sit down and read every single one of those million documents. You don't know if there's information in there that the users of your AI technology should not have. So when it comes to data sensitivity, first and foremost, be interviewing the authors to the best of your ability. Talk about, hey, what kind of information is in here? What have you done to secure this information in the past? What kind of access controls are in place? What kind of policies do you have for those that author and contribute to your base, right? Because at the end of the day, as a practitioner of AI who's implementing this technology into other applications, I'm accountable for what my bot said to a client or into an internal employee. And so I make sure that I go through those appropriate steps with my peers to say, hey, tell me what I'm about to be searching, because I'm accountable for what the bot puts out. So that being the case, I think we're going to turn it over to questions and answers. Karen, did you want to take it from here?
I do. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you so much, both of you, for the presentations. We are happy to answer any questions. As I mentioned, you can put them in the chat box. Just raise your hand or put them in the chat box. But as people raise hands or ask us in the chat box, we had a few questions that came in, and I'm just gonna read them out for you. Sorry for if I'm not saying them as we got them, but so Hannan, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation LangChain. Why not just use LangChain documentation loader? Sounds like a fairly easy, trivial solution.
Yeah, it is probably the most basic option. Like when I'm an AI developer and I'm using an open framework like LangChain, the first thing I'm typically doing is going to the documentation and seeing what they allow in terms of ingestion of knowledge. Now, here's the thing: LangChain document loaders is a pretty robust and extensible plugin architecture. But, and it's a big but, it assumes that first of all you have the knowledge centralized in one place. And it assumes that the knowledge is already in the form of some kind of an intermediate format that is very popular. So it might be an HTML, or it might be a PDF or a Word file or whatever it is. And the other thing that it assumes is that there are no requirements or requests for permissioning or segregation of the knowledge. So everybody can basically see everything, right? So typically what you would see is an AI developer taking LangChain and using a document loader on a subset or a test set of content that they already accumulated and standardized beforehand, and essentially just uses that for validating the concept. And that's great for a POC or for a feasibility phase. But then when you want to go to production, you realize that enterprise landscape is not that simple. The knowledge is all over the place. It's in multiple repositories. You need to use the API access to the native systems that house this knowledge. And the knowledge is very often in all kinds of raw formats where there is no LangChain, loaders for. And then you're stuck. And it's not just that, but then you realize that, customers can see this content, but shouldn't be seeing this content, and employees have this need and partners have this need, and it's just not scalable. So I think document loaders is a great option if you just want to trial something or do a quick POC. In production, you're probably going to hit a wall very quickly.
Hannan, I want to actually mirror exactly what you said. You're absolutely correct. POC only, and that's what we do. We practice with LangChain as a POC. We actually learn a lot from LangChain too. One day I was bored and I just started reading through the code, and I really wanted to understand how the history component of LangChain worked. Like, let's say you're building a chatbot and you say, I want to say this, and it asks a follow-up question, right? It goes back and forth. And something to be cognizant of, right, is in LangChain, if you ask a question and you have history turned on and you ask a follow-up question, it's actually taking the history of the conversation, it's summarizing it, and then it's adding that to the body of the prompt, almost like a document that's now retrievable, right? And so there are scenarios where in a LangChain, you can just have a full conversation, and then all of a sudden, you can now treat your conversation as something that's retrievable. And now the AI just believes that it's a document, right? And so if you think about it from a risk perspective, right, I can totally have talk to the bot and say, hey, let's build a company together. Here are the T's and C's of the company. And then you could say, hey, now what are the T's and C's for this product? All of a sudden, it's now made up a fictitious product, and it's now reading out fake T's and C's. And that wasn't the intention of the developer or the content author, right? And so think of it as kind of like a prompt injection, sort of. So yes, so LangChain, is it ready for prime time? Maybe. I'm waiting to see maybe a LangChain version 2.
All right, Ryan, is your recommendation to use public models or train your own models?
Ooh, that's a good question. Okay, so there's a lot of models out there, and as I speak, there were probably the release of 5 new ones, and I feel very, very confident that their businesses are going to align with a handful of different strategies. You're going to have economies of scale determining what's the best approach. So you'll have likely small economies of scale adopting the Swiss Army models that exist out there. I can think of a handful of them that are very, very good, right? I think some of the vendors are doing a great job of now sharing different models on their platform, like integrating with Hugging Face and just bringing it in, saying, here you go, load whatever model you want from Hugging Face. Have a great day. I also see that there are certain sectors that these large language models are just not equipped to handle their sector. Now let's take like a government use case, right? Models like GPT likely were not trained on all that highly sensitive data in a government use case. So is it possible that the governments are actually out there building and training their own models because they have a set of data that's not publicly available? Very likely. Think about the healthcare space, right? This has always been a field that's very interesting and evolving very quickly, right? So does it make sense for some really, really large healthcare providers to possibly build and train their own models because they have the most relevant up-to-date information? And then finally, I think there's a sensitive data component here. I can think of a handful of circumstances where the data is just, it's far too sensitive, and regardless of the vendor's ability to assure security of that, I think there's just an internal comfort. If I have my own data stores, if my data centers, I have my own GPUs, then why would I not use them in my own data center? So there's going to be a lot of different walks of life that determine which direction to go. Building and training models is expensive, and it will likely be expensive for a very long time. And so I would say right now, from an experimentation perspective, get cozy with the concept of Swiss Army knife models available. And even from a production implementation, there's a handful of models out there that I have begun to trust, and I do use at a production capacity.
Thank you. So we have a couple of content-related questions, content type, and maybe on the authoring side. So Hannan, I'm going to hand over those 2 questions to you. One is there any need to actually change the way content is being authored and published? And the second, how does that all work with content like videos or audio?
That's a great question. So from content practitioners, the first question is actually something we're hearing a lot. People are like, we've had our content written for 2, 5, 10 years. We've done it in different formats and different tools. And what does it now mean? Do I need to now redo the whole thing for the age of AI? And the answer is generally no. I mean, the answer is generally that the nice things about large language models and GPT is that it's basically capable of taking your content, and at the end of the day, it's text mostly, right? And it's very flexible in what it expects. As long as it's got good substance, it's there's very good chance that it's going to work well out of the box. Now, there are some things that would help. I mean, if your content generally, if your content is optimized for search and for SEO, that's a big bonus just because, by the virtue of the typical architecture that an enterprise would take, which uses RAG, retrieval augmented generation, what it does, it mimics a process of search as part of the retrieval of the content. So if your content is highly optimized for search, that just means that the large language model would be fed with the most appropriate pieces of content. So in general, I'm saying, and again, there's a lot of material on how to make your knowledge optimized for SEO and search. Some of it is about how you do short descriptions. Some of this is about the length, the chunking of the content to more granular parts, and some other best practices. But in general, the more structured your content is going to be and the more optimized it is for SEO and search, the better. But it's not a prerequisite, right? It's not a prerequisite in how you author it. In how you publish it, again, I discussed what I thought was the two important things. The centralization, just being able to put everything in the same place in a single schema. And one thing that's not necessarily on the pure authoring of the content itself, but the ability to somehow have metadata or tags that would allow us to later enforce access controls. So the more metadata you have that can be validated in a very clear way would allow you to, enforce that access control and make sure that you are able to filter or decide to show a certain piece of content or include that in a response to a prompt for a specific user.
All right.
With the second question about the videos and audios, right. So basically, there are a lot of AI applications that deal specifically with video and audio, but it's mostly for generation of these. I think for the purpose of the let's call it the typical AI application builder in the enterprise, it's more about how do I decompose existing video and audio content and not really on the generation of such content. And the answer is actually pretty straightforward. I mean, regardless of videos and audio, there are tools today and libraries today that support auto generation of transcriptions from videos and audio. And once you have a transcription, you have text. When you have a text, you can just index it just like anything else and ask a question. And so it's support for video and audio is pretty much commodity at this page if you're doing the right things.
Great. So the next question is very specific to Ryan, and I'm just going to read it as is because I don't want to miss anything here. So Ryan, you mentioned that search plays a big factor towards AI success. I thought that the whole idea of chatbot is to substitute search engines. Can you explain?
So that may or may not be a misconception because there are certain circumstances where the LLM is capable of articulating the right answer, right? And so I think when this LLM technology came out, everyone got really, really excited because it was trained on the corpus of the internet. Therefore, it knows everything. And so if I were to ask a very specialized question, right, who is Ryan Susman in North America, it would likely find the answer, right? Maybe, I don't know if I haven't checked. However, if I say just ambiguously, how do I reset my password? It's just going to, and so is it possible one day that there's going to be an LLM that knows everything regardless of ambiguity and it's going to work perfectly and it has the perfect follow-up questions? Maybe. We're not there yet. Think about how large the internet is, right? Exabytes of data. You would need to take all of that and you would need to turn it into one model that would still be exabytes in size. And so are we there yet? Probably not. Now, the benefits of LLMs, I used to say this all the time. LLMs are a natural language roadmap. To describe them as language calculators is a better example. And that is, if you test your LLM and you ask it a question, hey, how do I reset my password? And you're finding it gives you just this crazy answer. Give it a document. Say, with this document, how do I reset my password? And now you're thinking, okay, I'm actually using the LLM rather than just its infinite wisdom that it might be trained on. I'm now actually using it to augment a document that I have to give me a very clear and concise answer. And so that is where the industry has found an enormous amount of excitement. It is, if I give it 1, 3, 5, 10 documents and then ask it a question, it's almost like a human read those documents and articulated the answer to me. And that's why RAG is so powerful and so exciting.
Perfect.
I totally agree. I think there is a reason why it's being called knowledge grounding. Like everybody today understands that if you want to avoid hallucinations, if you want to avoid just bringing irrelevant content from the web, in enterprise scenarios, the ability to ground your AI to your knowledge is super important to make sure that the accuracy is where it needs to be.
Perfect. So I think we covered the questions that we got. I want us to recap what we've discussed today. So Ryan, if you can take us to the next slide. I think we basically wanted to, share with you 3 things that you can do tomorrow morning. We covered a lot of things here today. We talked about, the importance of AI and the importance of knowledge for AI, some best practices, where does it all sit in your tech stack, and so on and so forth. But let's think about, okay, I've heard all this. I have a few more questions. What's going to happen tomorrow morning? So the first one is ensure cross-functional alignment. So you are not alone in this, whether you are on the docs team, whether you are on the dev side, whether you are the AI expert. We've seen today that maybe, more than ever, the collaboration and the dependency between the different teams that are working on getting the most awesome AI experience to your users, everybody sits around this table. So while you can either, spearhead the conversation, be part of the conversation, make sure that you involve all the stakeholders that are involved in this, you can't really do one without the other, as we saw today. The second thing is put consolidation and governance first. So, we talked about things that may be great for a POC. Maybe you want to, start first with choosing your LLM, but the issue of governance and content consolidation, as we mentioned, AI is not going to work without a good, solid knowledge infrastructure. If you're not going to take care of that first in the most holistic and robust way, you're just going to encounter, hiccups along the way. So take your time, make sure that this is, rightly done, in place, and then from there, the journey is going to be much, much smoother for you. And the last thing is start small, but think big. So you've heard a lot of things today. It's not that tomorrow morning, your entire company across all function is going to implement AI within a week. So the idea is for you to, think about where you can start, whether it's a documentation portal or, a service application. Start bringing your knowledge into that, see what's working, see what's, what needs to be improved, and then build it up, right? So you can be the influencer in your company. We've seen, documentation teams that we work with that started with AI capabilities in their documentation portal, basically are now showing others across the organization how to do it. We've heard, companies that we work with, sitting around this table, whether it's an AI board or an AI task force, and, the question comes up like, okay, who has experiment? Who has done so? And finally, documentation teams are raising their hands and saying, we've got this. So don't be afraid to take the first leap tomorrow morning. Ryan, if you can take us to the next slide. When we say that you're not alone, we really mean it. So in addition to saying thank you today that you've joined us, we are here to support you to continue the conversation. So we've done this with really dozens of companies who wanted to start small, who wanted to build their own LLMs, who wanted to, buy an out-of-the-box solution, as Hannan mentioned. And we're here to help you to take those first steps. And I want to say a huge thank you to Ryan and Hannan. I always feel that I'm amongst AI giants, and I've learned so much from the two of you. And thank you everyone who joined us. Feel free to scan the barcode so you can be in touch with us, and enjoy the rest of your evening, afternoon, or morning. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.